The old pickup truck, a borrowed relic, coughed its way up the winding, overgrown driveway, spitting gravel with each strained rotation of its tires. Rain, a constant companion in this corner of the Pacific Northwest, slicked the ancient, gnarled trees that clawed at the sky, their branches like skeletal fingers. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the silence of the forest pressing in around me even over the engine's rumble. Blackwood Manor. My great-aunt Elara's desolate inheritance. I hadn't seen Elara in decades, not since I was a boy, and even then, he was more a whispered legend than a living relative. Now he was gone, a mysterious death, and I, Blake, was the sole beneficiary of him sprawling, isolated estate. A fresh start, I'd told myself. An escape from the suffocating grief that had clung to me like a shroud since everything fell apart. This was meant to be my sanctuary, a place to breathe. It was vast, far grander than I'd imagined, a gothic behemoth swallowed by the wilderness. The air, even through the closed windows of the truck, smelled of damp earth, decay, and something else. A faint, sweet, cloying odor that I couldn't quite place, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, but with a metallic edge. I parked in front of what must have once been a manicured circular drive, now just a moss-choked expanse of cracked flagstones. Stepping out, the silence was immediate, profound. The rain had eased to a fine drizzle, mist clinging to the ground. The only sound was the drip of water from sagging gutters and the rustle of unseen things in the dense undergrowth. The house loomed, impossibly large, its presence almost physical, a weight in the air. The heavy oak door, warped and scarred, groaned open with a shudder that vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak daylight that pierced the gloom, illuminating a cavernous entryway. It was like walking into a tomb that had never truly been sealed. Everywhere, furniture lay shrouded beneath white sheets, like spectral figures waiting to rise. I peeled back a corner of one sheet in the drawing room. A velvet chaise lounge, its fabric faded but still opulent, stared back at me. Elara's taste, even in neglect, was undeniably eccentric. My exploration took me deeper, past vast empty rooms, a library crammed with leather-bound tomes that smelled of mildew, and a dining hall long stripped of its warmth. The house felt alive, not in a comforting way, but as if it were holding its breath, listening. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but sometimes I swore I heard other sounds, soft scrapes, faint sighs, that weren't my own making. My eyes kept scanning the periphery, half expecting to catch a glimpse of something just out of sight. The strange, sweet smell intensified as I ventured toward the rear of the house. It was a corridor less grand than the others, narrower, lined with rougher stone. It wasn't just water damage, though. There was a faint, almost imperceptible sheen to it, and a strange, mottled texture that seemed to subtly shift under the weak light from a distant window. My fingers brushed against it. It felt cool, slick, almost gelatinous beneath the layer of dust. Following the corridor, the unsettling sense of presence grew. The walls here seemed to press in, the ceiling lower. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The sickly sweet smell was now overwhelming, mixed with a metallic tang that made my stomach clench. I ran my hand over the stone again, and this time, my fingers snagged on something. A fine hair-like filament, impossibly thin, embedded in a minute fissure. I pulled, and it snapped, leaving a faint green-tinged residue on my skin. Then I saw it. Tucked away at the very end of this forgotten passage, behind a heavy, rusting iron door that looked entirely out of place in a manor house, was a small, crudely painted sign. Death Row? Here? In a private residence? The incongruity was jarring, a blunt, brutal intrusion into the decaying elegance. This wasn't just an eccentric old house anymore. This was something else entirely. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the words with the reality of my great-aunt Elara, the botanist. What could she have been doing with a place like this? And why was it here? The question hung in the thick, still air, heavy and unanswered. A faint, rhythmic thrumming sound, almost like a slow, deep pulse, seemed to emanate from beyond the iron door. It was subtle, easily dismissed as the house settling, but it matched the beat of my own suddenly racing heart. The sweet, metallic scent grew sharper, filling my lungs with each shallow breath. My breath hitched. Death row? Here? In a private residence? This wasn't just an eccentric old house anymore. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the words with the reality of my great-aunt Elara, the reclusive botanist, and this sprawling, isolated manor. An old death row corridor marked for closure. It was scrawled in an old, faded hand, barely legible on a thick, dark oak door tucked away behind a service stairwell I'd found earlier. The door itself was stout, unyielding, with a single, heavy bolt that looked rusted shut. What kind of secrets had Elara kept, beyond her peculiar plants? I pulled my hand back, a sudden aversion to the door making me step away. I needed to ignore it, for now. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to impose some order on the chaos. I dragged the heavier boxes into the living room, intending to unpack the essentials first. As I wrestled with a particularly stubborn box flap, a sound reached me, faint but distinct. It wasn't the wind, not a creaking floorboard. It was too soft, too close to the edge of comprehension. I paused, my hand still on the cardboard. Then it came again, like dry leaves skittering across a stone path, but with an underlying cadence, almost a sigh. I told myself it was the house settling, the old timbers groaning under their own weight, but the hair on my arms prickled. I shook my head, tried to focus. Just the house, Blake. Just the house. I managed to unpack a few books, some clothes, and the old, battered photo album I'd brought with me. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, convinced I'd seen a movement, a shift in the periphery of my vision. A curtain, perhaps, swaying in a non-existent breeze. Or maybe just my imagination, overactive in this silent, echoing space. Not just the occasional groan, but a rhythmic, almost deliberate series of sounds from the floor above me. It wasn't heavy footsteps, more like something being dragged, or perhaps a collection of smaller things shifting across the floorboards. I tried to rationalize it. Squirrels in the attic, rats in the walls. But the sounds were too regular, too close. It sounded like it was coming from the master bedroom, directly above where I was trying to read. I snapped the book shut, the sound echoing unnaturally. This was ridiculous. I was letting an old house get to me. I needed a distraction, something to ground me. Elara's gardens. That was it. I remembered the estate agent mentioning a vast conservatory. Perhaps a walk through her horticultural legacy would clear my head. Armed with a flashlight, I navigated the labyrinthine corridors on the ground floor. The air grew progressively warmer, thicker, as I moved towards the back of the manor. The earthy scent intensified, now mingled with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I pushed through a heavy velvet curtain, its fabric stiff with age and dampness, and stopped dead. Before me stretched a colossal structure of glass and iron, a cathedral of vegetation. The conservatory. It was far larger than I'd imagined, easily a third of the manor's footprint. Every pane of glass was obscured by a thick, tangled embrace of vines, some as thick as my arm. Their leaves pressed flat against the grimy surface, filtering the moonlight into an eerie, watery gloom. The air inside was a suffocating blanket of humidity, so dense it felt like breathing water. Condensation beaded on every surface, dripping audibly from the unseen ceiling, creating a constant, rhythmic drip, drip, drip that resonated through the space. The smell here was overwhelming, a potent mix of damp earth, decaying leaves, and an almost animalistic musk that was deeply unsettling. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a chaotic jungle. Some had tendrils that snaked across the floor, reaching for each other. Or perhaps for me. There were blossoms of incredible lurid colors, some pulsating faintly with an internal light that made my breath catch. Then I heard it again. But here, in the heart of this verdant chaos, they were clearer, closer. They seemed to emanate from the very foliage around me, a rustling of leaves that wasn't caused by any breeze. They were not words I could understand, but they had a cadence, a rising and falling intonation, like a conversation carried out just beyond the threshold of my hearing. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't my imagination. Something moved. Something that shouldn't have moved, not on its own, not like that. I took a shaky step backward, my eyes wide, fixed on the spot where the tendril had disappeared. And then, from deep within the conservatory, from the very heart of the tangle, a low, resonant thrum vibrated through the damp air. A sound that felt less like a plant and more like a vast living organism drawing a slow, deliberate breath. This wasn't just Elara's garden. This was Elara's secret. And it was awake. The deepening twilight had a way of distorting the familiar, turning innocuous furniture into crouching shapes, and the corners of rooms into gaping maws. I'd caught myself glancing over my shoulder more times than I cared to admit, a prickle of unease tracing a path up my neck. The silence of Blackwood Manor wasn't empty. It was a weighty, watchful thing, punctuated by the subtle creaks and groans of ancient timbers settling, like a colossal beast shifting in its sleep. Despite the creeping dread, or perhaps because of it, an inexplicable pull began to assert itself. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly. Elara's conservatory. I remembered seeing its vast glass-paned roof from the outside, a crystalline hump on the manor's northern flank, almost swallowed by the overgrown foliage. I moved through the echoing halls, my footsteps surprisingly loud on the polished floorboards. The air grew perceptibly heavier, imbued with a damp, earthy fragrance that grew stronger with every step. The temperature climbed too, a humid warmth replacing the manor's usual cool, musty breath. Finally, I pushed open a set of heavy, unadorned wooden doors that had been almost invisible against a wall panel. The air that rushed out was thick, cloying, and sweet, like fermenting fruit mixed with damp soil. Stepping inside was like entering another world entirely. This wasn't just a greenhouse. It was a sprawling, verdant jungle, a colossal bubble of glass and steel housing a riot of life. Plants I'd never seen before climbed, twisted, and unfurled in every direction. Broad, waxy leaves dripped condensation onto the flagstone path. Others bore fleshy, bulbous growths that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, internal rhythm. The humidity pressed in, making my skin feel tacky, my clothes cling. I walked deeper, following a narrow, winding path that was almost entirely overgrown. There was a constant low hum, a chorus of unseen insects, or perhaps the plants themselves. I reached out, my fingers brushing against a leaf that felt like cool, damp velvet, then recoiled from another that was surprisingly rough, almost abrasive, like sandpaper. The sheer density of life here was overwhelming, a testament to Elara's obsessive dedication. But it wasn't just the quantity, it was the quality. These weren't the delicate orchids or vibrant roses one might expect. These were robust, almost aggressive specimens, their forms alien and unsettling. My gaze fell upon a small, wrought iron table tucked away beneath a monstrous fan-shaped frond. Elara's journals. My heart gave a little lurch. This was it. This was the source of the pull. I picked up the topmost journal. It was heavy, its pages brittle. The ink was faded, but Elara's spidery handwriting was still legible. The initial entries were typical botanical notes, Latin names, growth patterns, soil compositions. But as I flipped through, the tone shifted. The language became less scientific, more desperate, almost feverish. Entry 147. The specimens from the deepest layers of the bog exhibit unparalleled vitality. Their root systems, unlike anything I've cataloged. A resilience, a hunger. Entry 193. The growth accelerates. It responds to stimuli. Not light, not water, but intent. I flipped to another page, my fingers trembling slightly. Entry 258. The root demands more. It is spread beyond the conservatory. Its tendrils seek purchase in the very foundations of the manor. I feel its pulse in the walls, a low thrumming. And then, a name, repeated several times, underlined, almost scratched into the page. The Gluttony. It is not merely consuming, it is becoming. The air in the conservatory felt thicker, heavier, pressing in on me. The low hum seemed to intensify, and I could swear the fleshy bulbs on the plants around me were expanding more rapidly, their surfaces glistening. The plants weren't just growing, they were watching. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the frantic scrawl. Elara's mental state had clearly deteriorated. It offers the perfect environment, ample room for expansion. The deepest roots are there. And what had Elara been doing with her plants in such a place? Elara wasn't just tending a garden. He was cultivating a monstrous secret, and it had taken root in the very bedrock of her home. The manor wasn't just breathing. It was shuddering with a hidden, terrible life. I closed the journal with a snap, the sound echoing unnaturally in the dense foliage. Darkness, isolation, roots, expansion. The words had been a fragmented thought, a terrifying intuition, and now they coalesced into a chilling question. What had Elara been cultivating down there? My great-aunt, a botanist, had been tending to something in a place synonymous with finality, with containment. I pushed away from the dusty desk, the old leather chair groaning in protest. My skin felt clammy, a fine sheen of sweat despite the house's cool, cavernous interior. Maybe a walk, some fresh air, but even the thought of venturing back into the sprawling, overgrown gardens felt like stepping into a maw. No, the answer had to be inside, buried under layers of dust and Elara's peculiar legacy. A large, leather-bound volume, one of Elara's many botanical texts, sat precariously on a high shelf. I glanced up, my eyes tracing the ornate spine. For a split second, the book seemed to shiver, a faint tremor before it toppled forward, landing with a muffled thud on the Persian rug. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through the grime-streaked windows. I stared at it, then back at the shelf. No breeze, no vibration. Just a coincidence, I told myself. A loose book, an old house. But the rationalization felt flimsy, a thin shield against a burgeoning unease. I continued on, my pace quickening. I passed a tall, antique mirror, its silvered surface dulled with age. I caught my reflection, a weary figure with eyes too wide. But for a fleeting moment, my face in the glass seemed different. And then, just behind me, a movement. My heart gave a violent lurch against my ribs. Nothing. Just the dim light. The old glass. I forced myself to look away, my palms suddenly slick. The air grew heavier, the earthy, fungal smell intensifying. It clung to my clothes, to my hair. I felt it coating the back of my throat. I reached Elara's study, hoping to find a working landline, or at least some clue. The room was just as I'd left it. Organized chaos. It moved perhaps an inch, a tiny shift, but enough to make the sound resonate in the quiet room. My head snapped towards it. No one. My skin prickled with goosebumps. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't settling. This was deliberate. The house wasn't just old. It felt alive. And it was watching me. I could feel an omnipresent, malevolent gaze, not from a specific corner, but from the very fabric of the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was a pressure, a silent scrutiny that made me feel utterly exposed. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling. No signal, not even a single bar. I'd had intermittent service before, enough to send a text or two. Now nothing. I held it up, walked to the window, then back to the center of the room. Dead. I cursed under my breath, then spotted the old rotary phone on Elara's desk, half hidden by a stack of journals. Hope, a fragile thing, flickered. I picked up the receiver. It wasn't the house settling. It was a deeper, more resonant sound, like an enormous stomach churning. What was making those sounds? I spun around, my gaze darting to a heavy, ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the study. The hands were frozen, but the pendulum moved, a mocking heartbeat in the silent room. I wasn't just isolated. I was trapped. It wanted me here. It wanted me for something. It lay open on the desk, as if he had just left it. My gaze snagged on a phrase, scrawled in her elegant looping hand, underlined multiple times. The roots demand sustenance. They grow, they seek, they consume. And the corridor is the heart. The words vibrated in the humid air, not just a discovery, but a confirmation. The house was alive. It was growing. And it was hungry. I was its new host, its new source. I was deep in the conservatory, but it wasn't the broken glass and overgrown chaos I knew. Here, the plants pulsed with a sickly green light, their tendrils not just stretching, but reaching. They coiled around my ankles, not painful, just firm, pulling me deeper into their emerald embrace. A massive bulbous bloom, like a grotesque, fleshy pitcher plant, opened before me. Its interior a swirling vortex of deep purple and black. From its depths, a sweet, cloying aroma billowed out, thick and suffocating, wrapping around me until my lungs burned. I woke with a gasp, the taste of something metallic and floral coating my tongue. My bedroom was dark, save for the sliver of moonlight pushing past the heavy curtains. For a long moment, I lay there, listening. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Getting out of bed felt like wading through thick water. The air in the room, usually just cool, now felt heavy, almost viscous. I made my way to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking underfoot like strained ligaments. Coffee, that's what I needed. Something normal. But normalcy was a luxury Blackwood Manor had withdrawn. As I waited for the water to boil, the ceramic tiles on the countertop seemed to ripple at the edges of my vision. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, I told myself. Stress. But the image lingered. A faint afterimage burned into my retina. The day progressed in a similar vein, a slow, insidious creep of distortion. I'd be walking down a hallway and the wallpaper would seem to shift, the patterns subtly rearranging themselves into something organic, something that looked like clustered spores or microscopic filaments. The compulsion started subtly, a vague, restless urge to explore, to delve deeper into the house's forgotten corners. It wasn't curiosity. It was a pull, an insistent tug in my gut, drawing me away from the relative safety of the main living areas. My feet seemed to have a will of their own, leading me down unfamiliar staircases and through cobweb-laden passages I hadn't noticed before. The walls were bare stone, weeping with moisture, and the floor was uneven, littered with crumbled plaster and what looked like desiccated organic matter. A faint, ethereal glow caught my eye, emanating from a recess in the far wall. It wasn't electric. It was soft, pulsating, a gentle green light that seemed to breathe. My steps quickened, a strange anticipation coiling in my chest. This wasn't fear, not exactly, It was a magnetic draw, a strange, undeniable urgency that overrode all caution. It was roughly the size of a plum, encased in a translucent, gelatinous membrane that shimmered with that soft, internal light. It pulsed with an almost imperceptible rhythm, a slow, steady beat that seemed to echo the thrum I felt in the house itself. I knelt, my breath catching in my throat. My hand, without conscious command, extended towards it. My fingers trembled as they neared the glowing membrane. It felt cool, slick, almost alive. A faint, sweet scent, like the sickly floral aroma from my dream, wafted up from it, intoxicating and strangely comforting. I felt a profound sense of connection, a recognition. It wasn't just a plant, it was a piece of the house, a fragment of the thing that now coursed through Blackwood Manor and through me. A voice, not my own, but a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate from the very stones of the corridor whispered in my mind. Mine, yours. My fingers brushed the spore. The green light intensified, flaring briefly before settling back into its gentle pulse. A warmth spread from my fingertips, up my arm, and into my chest. It wasn't unpleasant. My mind felt clearer, sharper, yet at the same time, strangely detached. The fear was still there, a distant echo, but it was receding, replaced by this overwhelming, almost blissful connection. I wanted to take it. I needed to take it. The compulsion was no longer a tug, it was a command, clear and undeniable. This spore, this glowing, living thing, was meant for me. It was part of my inheritance. The warmth from the spore deepened, a silent current flowing beneath my skin. My fingers, still tingling, pulled back from the glowing growth, but the strange, comforting heat lingered, a phantom touch. It was unsettling, yet undeniably soothing. I frowned, the conflict of feeling both comforted and profoundly disturbed churning in my gut. This place, this house, it wasn't just old, it was alive. And Elara, my great-aunt, she hadn't just lived here. He had been part of it, woven into its very fabric. The journals. They were my only anchor in this swirling tide of strangeness. I retreated from the damp, whispering hall, the spore's gentle pulse a faint beacon in my peripheral vision. Back in Elara's study, the air felt drier, though still heavy with the scent of decaying paper and something else, something green and faintly metallic. I pulled another stack of journals from the dusty shelves, these ones smaller, bound in brittle leather, their pages yellowed and thin. Unlike the earlier precise botanical notes, these later volumes had a more erratic feel, the ink sometimes smudged, the handwriting sprawling. The first few entries chronicled familiar plant species, detailed observations of growth cycles and soil compositions. But then, a shift. They speak of nourishment, of exchange, not just light and water, but something deeper, a reciprocation. My brow furrowed. Reciprocation? What could a plant reciprocate beyond oxygen and beauty? I flipped more pages, the warmth in my chest a constant low thrum. Elara's prose became less scientific, more lyrical, infused with a manic energy. She wrote of the house itself as a living entity, its timbers groaning not with age but with expression. She detailed how certain growths, the ones I'd seen in the basement, responded to attention. They thrive on intent, a scrawled passage declared. My focus, my will, it feeds them, but they hunger for more, a deeper connection. What kind of hunger? As I delved deeper, Elara's entries grew increasingly unsettling. She began to refer to the plants not as specimens, but as the collective, the root mind. Her language became almost devotional. She described the plants communicating with her, not through words, but through vibrations, through a shared consciousness that permeated the very earth beneath Blackwood Manor. They are ancient, one entry stated, The letters pressed hard into the page, almost tearing the paper. Older than trees, older than stone. They simply are, and they require sustenance. They have shown me the way, the old ways. Exchange, that word again. What was being exchanged? My eyes darted to a diagram scrawled on a facing page. A crude map of the manor's sublevels, showing intricate root systems spreading beneath the foundations. What on earth did that mean? And why was it marked for closure? Had she found it here? Or was it a metaphor for something else entirely? She believed he was enlightened. They showed me the true nature of life and death, she scribbled, the ink bleeding slightly. The cycle is not ending but a continuation, a return, a feeding. The manor breathes because it lives. Elara wasn't just a reclusive botanist. He was a facilitator, a high priestess to something ancient and hungry. The plants weren't just growing, they were consuming, preparing me for the exchange, preparing me to be fed. Elara hadn't just lost her mind. He had willingly surrendered it, offered it up to the root mind, becoming a part of its monstrous appetite. And now, I was here, in her house, touching its spores, reading its scripture. Whatever horrors Elara had unleashed, whatever he had become, I had a terrifying suspicion that the answers, and perhaps the key to stopping it, lay in that forgotten, ominous passage. The realization had settled deep within me, a cold, heavy stone in my gut. Elara, my reclusive great-aunt, wasn't just a botanist. He was a keeper, a warden, perhaps even a willing participant in something monstrous. The warmth that had, until recently, felt comforting, now seemed insidious, a slow-acting poison seeping into my very bones. The manor wasn't just infested, it was consumed. And the pervasive, humid air, thick with the scent of loam and something indescribably sweet, was its breath. I slammed Elara's journal shut, the leather cover thudding against the aged wood of the desk. My hands trembled, not with fear yet, but with a raw, desperate determination. I needed to find its heart. I flipped the journal open again, scanning the last entries. Elara's handwriting, usually precise and elegant, had devolved into a frantic scrawl in the final pages. I knew them well, or thought I did. They were a cavernous, neglected space in the manor's oldest wing, rarely used, smelling perpetually of damp stone and forgotten spices. I grabbed a powerful LED lantern, its beam cutting a stark path through the twilight gloom that had begun to creep in. My old work boots crunched on fallen plaster and dust as I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors. The air hung heavy, stagnant. Rusting pots still hung from hooks, coated in generations of grime. I played the lantern beam across the floor, looking for anything out of place. Elara's note had been specific. Where the condemned once walked. It was an odd phrase, out of context for a manor, even one as old as Blackwood. Nothing. Just solid stone, impenetrable and silent. Had I misunderstood? Was this just the rambling of a woman driven mad? Then, near an ancient, disused dumbwaiter shaft, I noticed it. A faint seam in the stone, almost invisible, following the line of what appeared to be a massive rectangular slab. It was too perfect, too regular to be natural. I shoved the shelf aside, the wood groaning in protest, showering me with dust and fragments of desiccated insects. The seam was more pronounced now, almost a hairline crack. I ran my fingers along it, feeling the subtle give, the faint vibration of hidden mechanisms. I swept the lantern beam methodically until my gaze landed on a small, recessed indentation near the floor, no bigger than my thumb. I pressed it. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the kitchen, the sound of ancient stone shifting. The massive slab of wall slowly, agonizingly began to pivot inward, revealing a gap of profound, inky blackness. Alive. My lantern beam pierced the gloom, revealing a short, steep flight of stone steps leading down. The steps opened into a long, low-ceilinged corridor, the walls slick with condensation. This was it. It was clear this wasn't part of the manor's original design, or at least not its upper levels. The architecture here was harsher, more utilitarian, designed for containment rather than comfort. Iron rings, rusted and corroded, were embedded in the stone walls at regular intervals, their purpose grimly clear. The floor was uneven, worn smooth in places by countless footsteps, or perhaps something else dragging itself along. They weren't like the vibrant, almost beautiful plants upstairs. These were pallid, sickly, yet undeniably vital. They pulsed faintly under my lantern's beam, a slow, rhythmic throb that seemed to synchronize with the distant warmth I felt. The corridor stretched on, longer than I anticipated, twisting and turning, becoming ever more claustrophobic. The air became thick, difficult to breathe, saturated with that strange, metallic earth smell. The fungal growths grew bolder, thicker, forming matted carpets on the floor, climbing the walls like a grotesque living tapestry. They weren't just growing on the stone. They seemed to be fusing with it, dissolving it. Then, the floor began to slope sharply downwards. My lantern beam, even at its brightest, struggled to illuminate the full extent of it. The sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. It was a nightmare made manifest. A colossal network of roots, thick as ancient tree trunks, filled the chamber, weaving and intertwining, forming a grotesque, organic cathedral. Fungal growths, massive and fleshy, clung to the roots, exuding a viscous, shimmering fluid that dripped onto the stone floor with a soft, sickening plink, plink, plink. The air was hot now, humid, cloying, smelling overpoweringly of that sweet, earthy, metallic scent. This was the source of the warmth, the hunger, the insidious life that had claimed Elara and was now reaching for me. The roots pulsed again, a deep, slow contraction, and a wave of that cloying warmth washed over me, deeper, more intimate than ever before. It wasn't just consuming the estate. It was the estate. Blackwood Manor was merely its hardened shell, its surface manifestation. It was alive, and I was standing in its core. I grabbed a powerful LED lantern, its beam cutting a stark path through the twilight gloom that had begun to thicken, pressing in from the uncurtained windows. The old kitchens. I knew them well, or thought I did. It tickled the back of my throat, making my stomach churn. The air felt heavier here, saturated not just with scent, but with a palpable pressure against my eardrums. It wasn't just the house settling. It was a rhythmic pulse, slow and deep, like a vast hidden heart. I aimed the lantern, sweeping its powerful beam across the high ceilings, past the rusting iron pots and pans hanging like forgotten skeletons. The walls, usually just damp stone, now seemed to weep a dark, viscous liquid that caught the light, gleaming like crude oil. And the growths? They were more aggressive here, thicker, forming a living tapestry that pulsed faintly. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by something far more ancient and encompassing. I found myself descending a set of narrow, winding steps I barely remembered, leading deeper into the manor's foundations. The walls here were no longer stone. They were a dense, interwoven network of fibrous roots, thick as my arm in places, slick with moisture. They formed archways and tunnels, guiding me down into the earth itself. The scent of decay became overwhelming, a rich fungal aroma that clawed at my sinuses. At first, I dismissed them as the wind or the creaking of old timbers, but they became clearer, more distinct. My grip on the lantern tightened, knuckles white. I tried to focus on the beam, on the path ahead, but the sounds were a relentless assault. Suddenly, a flash of something in my peripheral vision. A child's toy, a small, worn wooden bird, lying amidst a tangle of roots. It was hers, the one she always carried. I blinked, a desperate attempt to clear my vision, but when I looked again, the toy was gone, replaced by a gnarled knot in the root system. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. It was the sound of grief, of unimaginable loss, and it echoed a pain I knew intimately. But they weren't just memories. They were twisted, corrupted. Her tiny hand, reaching out, was now covered in clinging tendrils, her face obscured by a blossoming fungal growth. The texture was sickening, yet there was a strange, almost comforting give to it. A sense of wrongness, of profound violation washed over me. But beneath it, a faint, insidious warmth began to spread. The air here was thick with the cloying sweetness, now mixed with something metallic, like old blood. My head swam. A vision flashed before my eyes. Elara, her face gaunt, her eyes distant, her hands sunk deep into the soil of her garden, murmuring to something unseen. But her face was distorted, her features blurring, shifting, becoming less human, more vegetative. It was inside my head, a thought that wasn't my own. It calls to you. The tendrils on the walls seemed to reach for me, not with malice, but with an almost tender invitation. The grief, the crushing weight of my past tragedy, suddenly felt distant, dulled, absorbed into the vast, indifferent pulse of the root. My sanity, a fragile construct, was eroding. The line between my memories and the manor's horrors blurred, then vanished. I was no longer Blake, the man haunted by loss. And in that terrifying, all-consuming moment, I felt a terrifying calm, a profound, undeniable sense of coming home. The warmth that had threatened to consume me evaporated like morning mist under a sudden, brutal sun. The tendrils, no longer inviting, seemed to grip. The whisper in my mind, once a lullaby, sharpened into a command, an insidious directive to simply yield. But I wouldn't. Not again. The memory of my own tragedy, the helplessness surged, not as a weakness this time, but as a burning, furious resolve. I wouldn't be a victim to another insidious force. I stumbled back, ripping my arm from the wall, the faint, sticky residue clinging to my skin like a second, unwanted epidermis. My chest heaved. This wasn't just a house. It was a hungry, conscious thing, and it wanted me. Every fiber of my being screamed for escape, but a deeper, more primal instinct demanded a fight. I had to sever this connection, cut it off at the root before it consumed what little I had left of myself. My gaze fell on the old, rusting axe propped against the shed wall, a tool I'd found earlier, meant for splitting firewood, now repurposed. It felt heavy and cold in my grasp, a blunt promise of defiance. The conservatory. That was the heart of it, the place where Elara had nurtured this monstrosity. If I could destroy enough of it, rip it out, maybe I could starve whatever was trying to take hold. The air in the conservatory was thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit turning to rot. The light filtering through the grimy glass ceiling was a sickly green, illuminating the grotesque, pulsating network of vines that crisscrossed the space. They were thicker now, some as wide as my arm, thrumming with a disturbing internal rhythm. I raised the axe, the metal glinting. "No," I rasped, my voice hoarse. "You won't have me." My first swing was clumsy, fueled by raw adrenaline and terror. The blade bit deep into a particularly thick vine snaking across the stone floor. The reaction was immediate, violent. The entire conservatory seemed to shiver. The smaller tendrils on the walls, previously static, began to writhe. They lashed out, whip-like, some tipped with thorns that scraped against my clothes. One snagged my arm, digging in, and a sharp pain shot up to my shoulder. This wasn't just plant life reacting. This was something intelligent fighting back. I swung again, harder, aiming for the central root system I'd glimpsed beneath the raised beds, a gnarled, bulbous mass that seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate beat. Thwack! Another gash. More sap. My name distorted, drawn out, laced with a seductive sorrow. And then, a different voice, one I knew too well, too painfully well. My lost loved one, calling to me, pleading. Blake, come back. It was a trick, a cruel, gut-wrenching illusion. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head, the axe held tight. Lies. You're a lie. When I opened my eyes, the conservatory was subtly different. The air was filled with a metallic tang, like old blood. A doorway, previously unseen, materialized in the far wall, a heavy, iron-bound portal that seemed utterly out of place amidst the botanical chaos. But I recognized the insidious lure now. It was a trap, a diversion. My resolve hardened. I wouldn't be led away from my purpose. I raised the axe again, aiming for the core root mass. Just as the axe was about to connect, a sudden violent surge of growth erupted from the floor. Thick, thorny vines, as rigid as steel cables, shot upwards, wrapping around my legs, binding them together. I cried out, losing my footing, the axe clattering away across the stone. I fell hard, my head striking the edge of a planter. A jolt of pain, a rush of dizziness. My vision swam, the green haze of the conservatory bleeding into the grimy gray of the new, terrifying space that was now revealing itself. The vines dragged me, inexorably, towards that ominous doorway. I scrabbled at the floor, tearing my nails, but the grip was too strong. The air here was bone-dry and frigid, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of mildew and desperation. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, my vision still blurry around the edges. I was in a long, narrow corridor, lined with what looked like rusted, barred doors set into thick concrete walls. The ceiling was low, heavy. This wasn't an illusion. This was a physical space, hidden, forgotten, and now revealed. The manor hadn't just fought back. It had imprisoned me. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Elara hadn't just tended this thing. He had been its jailer, or perhaps its first victim, a keeper of a horror that had ultimately consumed her. And now it was my turn. The connection I'd felt, the strange sense of belonging, wasn't an invitation to join. It was the first step in my own confinement, my own quiet execution. I was trapped, injured, and utterly, terrifyingly alone in a place designed for endings. The conservatory was no longer a place of light and life. The air, thick and cloying, tasted like old pennies and wet soil. The vibrant green I remembered had receded, replaced by a sickly, yellowed pallor on the remaining leaves, and vast stretches of crumbling concrete where the walls had once been verdant. Dark, weeping stains, the color of dried blood and rust, snaked down the exposed stone, forming patterns that seemed too deliberate, too organic. It wasn't just decay. It was a deliberate unmaking, as if the very structure was being consumed from within. My breath hitched. The plants themselves were the most unsettling. Their tendrils, once supple and reaching, were now stiff, brittle, and covered in a fine silver-gray fuzz that shimmered faintly in the dim light. They pulsed, almost imperceptibly, with a low, thrumming vibration that resonated in my teeth. It wasn't the gentle hum of life, but the deep, resonant throb of something immense and utterly alien. I walked slowly, my boots crunching on fallen debris, a mix of plaster and dry, skeletal leaves. The metallic tang in the air grew sharper, almost acrid. It pulled at me, a grotesque scent that promised both revelation and ruin. I followed its increasing intensity, my hand brushing against a wall that felt rough and granular like dried mud. Here, the concrete had fallen away almost entirely, revealing a deeper, older layer of the manor's foundation. And within that raw, exposed cavity, something shifted. It wasn't a door, not exactly. It was an invitation, or perhaps a summons. I had to know. Ducking my head, I squeezed through the opening. The passage beyond was narrow, a crude tunnel carved through what felt like compacted earth and ancient stone. The air was a suffocating blanket, pressing in on me, making my ears pop. I could hear the faint, wet drip of water somewhere ahead, and the scuttling of unseen things. My hand, outstretched, scraped against a surface that felt slimy and alive, then rough and brittle. A constant shift between organic and inorganic. The tunnel twisted, descending in a gradual slope, until I emerged into a long, low-ceilinged corridor. This place was utterly devoid of natural light, illuminated only by the faint phosphorescent glow emanating from the fungal growths that coated the walls and floor like a macabre carpet. The air here was heavy, stagnant, carrying a profound sense of despair. A place he had sealed off, perhaps, or a place where he had sealed something in, or worse, sealed something out. They looked like forgotten cells, or perhaps containment units for something she wished to observe. It was larger, thicker than the others I'd found, its cover warped and stained. This had to be it. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The leather felt strangely warm, almost alive. I flipped through the brittle, fungal-spotted pages until I found the last entry, written in Elara's familiar, elegant script, now spidery and erratic, as if penned by a hand possessed. Entry 417, the offering. The root demands. Its hunger is not for sustenance, but for communion. It is not an entity to be appeased, but to be joined. The old ways speak of sacrifice, of blood and bone, but the root requires something deeper, something of the very self. It yearns for consciousness, a vessel to perceive, to experience, to become. My purpose, my life's work, has led to this singular, profound understanding. The ritual is simple in its terrifying elegance. To offer the self, not as victim, but as willing conduit. To shed the skin of individuality, to surrender the paltry ego and to merge. To allow the tendrils to seek out the deepest parts of the mind, to intertwine with every memory, every thought, every dream. To become one with the vast, sprawling network. To be both root and branch, soil and sky, life and decay. My great-aunt, she spoke of the flowering. This is it. Not death, but transformation. I embrace it. I welcome the flowering. I offer myself freely, utterly to the great garden. I dropped the journal. It landed with a soft, sickening thud on the damp stone. She hadn't been a victim, not entirely. She hadn't been consumed against her will. He had chosen this. He had embraced the transformation, the horrific merger. He had become a part of the root, a conscious, willing node in its vast subterranean network. As I stared at the journal, the glowing fungi on the walls began to pulse faster, a rhythmic, insistent beat. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with that sweet, fungal scent, now laced with something else. A faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the stone, through my very bones. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but felt in my chest, a deep, pervasive pressure. The manor wasn't just holding me. It was calling to me. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a single, vast organism, and it had a hunger. It craved a new consciousness, a new vessel, just as Elara had described. It wanted me to make the same choice, to perform the same ritual, to offer myself, to become one. Succumb? To become a sentient root, my mind subsumed into an ancient alien intelligence? To flower into oblivion? No. A fierce, desperate resolve ignited within me, burning away the fear, leaving behind a hard, unwavering determination. Elara might have chosen this path, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. The manor hummed, a low, demanding growl. It was an impossible choice, a grotesque parody of life and death. But for me, there was only one path: escape. No matter the cost, no matter the impossibility, I would not become the next bloom in Elara's monstrous garden. I would fight. I dropped the journal. The words echoed in the oppressive silence. Elara's voice, manic and chillingly serene, ringing in my head. She hadn't been a victim, not entirely. She hadn't been consumed against her will. He had chosen this. He had embraced it. The realization was a colder shock than any icy draft in this decrepit house. I hadn't come to save anyone. I'd walked into a meticulously laid trap. The air grew thick, humid, pressing in like a sodden blanket. The organic growths that had been merely creeping along the walls now seemed to writhe, tendrils stretching, seeking. They weren't just plants. They were veins, nerves, a sprawling, hungry network. My eyes darted around the subterranean chamber, seeking any exit. The only way was deeper, through a narrow, arching passage that looked less like a doorway and more like a gullet. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, hinting at something unnatural within. Come, join, belong. I stumbled forward, driven by a primal need to escape the crushing weight of Elara's legacy. It was the scent of a wound that had festered and then blossomed into something monstrous. My breath hitched in my throat. The passage opened into a wider space, and I stopped dead. This was it. The place I'd seen referenced in some of Elara's more cryptic notes, though I hadn't understood their true meaning until now. It wasn't a conventional prison corridor. It was a series of heavy, rusted gates set into walls that were no longer stone, but a living, pulsating matrix of the growths. These weren't cells for people. They were something else entirely. The corridor itself was less a passage and more a channel. The floor was slick with a viscous ooze, and the air throbbed with the entity's presence. It was here, I realized with a sickening lurch, that Elara had made her final, grotesque transformation. This wasn't a place of punishment, but of assimilation. The gates I saw now were not to keep things in, but to contain the process, to focus the energy. A low, resonant hum began to build, vibrating up through my feet. It was the sound of the root awakening fully. The growths along the walls pulsed brighter, their sickly green light now radiating with a deep internal heat. From the furthest cell, a central chamber at the very end of the corridor, a new light began to emanate. A deep emerald glow that seemed to draw all the other light into itself. My eyes fixated on that final cell. It wasn't empty. A form, vaguely human-shaped, but stretched and twisted, its surface a glistening network of tendrils and roots, filled the space. It pulsed with the same light, the same terrible energy. This was what Elara had become. This was her choice made manifest. And it was waiting for me. You are... It was Elara's voice, but layered with countless others. A chorus of forgotten souls, a symphony of absorbed consciousnesses. The sorrow, the emptiness, it makes you fertile. A perfect host. You will complete us. The words were a brutal punch to my gut. The true horror wasn't just that Elara had given herself over, but that he had cultivated me as well. My grief, my personal tragedy, the very reason I'd come to Blackwood Manor. It had all been a preparation, a softening of the ground. I was not an escapee. I was the harvest. The emerald light intensified, and from the central form, tendrils began to snake out across the slick floor towards me. They moved with an unsettling intelligence, their tips quivering, seeking. It wanted to reach me, to envelop me, to draw me into that horrific embrace. I wouldn't. Not like this. A desperate, primal surge of defiance ripped through me. I didn't know if I could fight it, but I wouldn't simply lie down. There was a small, grimy grate high on the wall, near the entrance to the corridor, barely visible through the pulsating growth. An old ventilation shaft, perhaps? It looked too small, too impossibly high. But it was up. It was out. The tendrils were faster now, whipping across the floor, some already brushing against my ankles. I scrambled onto a low, moss-covered ledge, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the pulsating wall. Futile resistance, join, peace. I ignored it, my muscles screaming as I pulled myself up, higher and higher, my hands tearing at the organic matter, leaving streaks of black-green ichor on my skin. The grate was flimsy, rusted. With a guttural roar, I kicked at it, once, twice. It gave way with a screech of tortured metal, showering me with dust and flakes of rust. I squeezed through the opening, scraping skin from my shoulders and back, the rough edges of the shaft tearing at my clothes. I could still hear the chorus of voices, but they were fading, growing distant. The humid, cloying air of the corridor was slowly replaced by the musty, cool air of the manor's higher levels. I didn't stop crawling until the shaft ended abruptly, dropping me onto a dusty, forgotten attic floor. I lay there gasping, my body aching, my mind reeling. I had escaped. But as I pushed myself to my feet, the faint, resonant thrum of the manor still echoed within me, a phantom vibration in my bones. And when I looked at my hands, still smeared with the entity's ichor, I could almost feel a faint, tingling pulse beneath my skin. Blackwood Manor remained, rooted and waiting, its ancient evil unbroken.